Courtney Brown. I'm director of the Far Sight Institute. We've had a public project going back over 10 years, and so we have a whole collection of them on our website, but the latest one is on the Phoenix Lights, which is a series of lights that flew in formation over Phoenix, Arizona, and over 5 states in the Southwest, including Sonora, Mexico, and 4 American states, that were seen by potentially hundreds of thousands of people and definitively tens of thousands of people, including the governor of the state of Arizona. And the U.S. military, 6 months after the event, issued a statement through a flight lieutenant saying, "Oh, those are just flares that we dropped during training exercises." But that didn't match with what people saw. And the governor of the state, who is a former Air Force officer and a pilot, he went on record as saying, this is bigger than anything I've ever seen. He called it it looked like an extraterrestrial spacecraft. People that saw it, and we were talking tens of thousands of people, said it was so big it blocked out the sky above, and it had lights on the sides of it and the whole thing. And so, the eyewitness reports did not match the government statements, so that was a mystery. That was a classic thing for using remote viewing. So the 2 remote viewers that were working on this particular project, the Phoenix Lights, were Daz Smith, who's from the UK, and he works with the CRB methodology, and that was a methodology that came out of an official military program. And Dick Algar, who works out in Hawaii using a procedure known as the HRVG methodology. So 2 different methodologies, 2 different approaches, no communication between them, and no prior knowledge of what the target is. They both did their sessions and sent them in, and they gave unbelievably, stunningly accurate descriptions of the area, the desert city in the American Southwest, and the lights. And the official governmental story that it was some flares does not win. It appears to have been an actual spacecraft. And there was an unusual thing that happened in one of the recordings that we can talk about later. There seems to have been a direct communication between someone on the spacecraft and one of our remote viewers, Dick Algar. Sort of like a conversation in a sense, but a communication is a better way to put it. And that's interesting because the Phoenix Lights incident happened back in 1997, and we're talking about the remote viewing happening in 2015. So that's very interesting, because that means that there was people at the site, that there were extraterrestrials on a spacecraft at the site in 1997 that knew full well that they were communicating with humans investigating the event in 2015. But anyway, that was part of the Phoenix Lights surprise that we came into. It wasn't just the remote viewing of the lights themselves, but remote viewing of the lights in combination with the apparent communication. There were a lot of lights, and they hung around for a long time, and they were in formation. And like the governor of Arizona said, flares don't fly in formation. They also don't stay up there for like 2 hours. And they certainly don't cross state boundaries, 5 state boundaries. And the mainstream media basically was silent on the whole thing until the government sent out their flight lieutenant to explain them away with a statement, oh, they were just flares. And mainstream media was more than dutiful in promoting that idea. Oh, by the way, there was an event that happened back, and now we know what it was. It was just flares. So it's sort of funny to see how the mainstream media kicks into gear. The basic idea is that both viewers had essentially very similar data, but if there was to be a difference between them, it was that Dick Algar spent some time actually reaching out to and connecting with this very tall alien being, whereas Daz Smith described the very tall alien being, and they both described as sort of helpers around the person. Whereas Daz Smith really focused on a description of the The craft, a really nice drawing of the shape of the craft. It really matched the eyewitness accounts. He clearly identified it as a city in the American Southwest, a desert city in the American Southwest. And they both described it as an encounter that was sort of like an alien encounter, sort of like a first contact type of alien encounter, where you have very advanced extraterrestrials coming down, interacting with, communicating with people on the ground that were looking up and observing this light show and so on. So they both had all of that stuff. They both described Phoenix very well, the desert environment very well. You see, all remote viewing data are broken into two basic categories. There's what we call verifiable data, and then what we call new data. Now, the verifiable data are those which we know to be factual on the ground. And that is, we had a desert city, we had American Southwest, we had lots of people looking up and seeing lights in the sky. Those are elements that are absolutely verifiable, and we want the remote viewing data to reflect those. And it did it perfectly for both viewers. Now we have new data, which are, once you see the lights in the sky, the viewers went to the lights and says, what are those? And then they described what those lights are. So you always evaluate remote viewing data based on how good the verifiable components are before you actually think about the new data. If the viewers just went in and said, I'm seeing an extraterrestrial spacecraft, and that's all they described, you can take the whole session and throw it out. It has to have all that verifiable stuff so you can say that this is clearly, on target description. So with regard to the Phoenix lights, we have all of that verifiable stuff. So anyway, both of the remote viewers got the verifiable stuff spot on, and they both had the same new stuff. That's what was so interesting. So this apparently, Greg, really was an extraterrestrial spacecraft, but the real interesting thing from my perspective is that the people on the spacecraft knew that they were communicating with people in 2015, even though they themselves were in 1997. That's, to me, really, really interesting. They could have ignored us. They could have just said, to heck with this, they're just a bother. But they didn't. It's really sort of spooky, to be quite honest. But it's unusual, and it gives an idea of if what we were doing at Farsight was not important, then the extraterrestrials on that craft would not have spent the time to deal with us. So that was a good indication that what we are doing matters. In the documentary, we go through all of the remote viewing for both viewers, and we start with Daz Smith, and he describes the being, describes the helpers, describes the people on the ground, describes the spacecraft above, describes the location, and exactly spot on identifies where that location is in terms of the American Southwest desert city. And then we move to Dick Algire's session, and he essentially repeats much of the same thing, amazingly, describing the light in the sky that everybody's looking at, formation of lights in the sky, and the spacecraft. And he then describes what appears to be the exact same being in the spacecraft, and then he gets really close to the being. And this is very interesting, Greg, because when you remote view humans, they can never tell you're remote viewing them. They just can't. However, with extraterrestrials that are advanced extraterrestrials, that's not the case. They actually know you're remote viewing. In fact, they often see you coming and seem to expect you coming. And they see you, and they often turn right in your direction, look at you. It's like you leave some type of a ghostly vestige of yourself, some type of a presence you leave when you go there. And they actually look right at you. Now, this was described very early in the remote viewing literature by Ingo Swann in his book Penetration, which I understand is now available as a free ebook. And he described it where he was taken by the U.S. military and asked to remote view some locations on the moon. And he did. And Ingo Swann was the inventor of the CRV methodology. And during the remote viewing on the moon, he said that some of the extraterrestrials on the moon actually were turning around and pointing at him and looking at him and saying, "Look at over there." And then the military got freaked out, and they did something really sort of, in current standards, was sort of silly. They said, "Pull back, pull back. We don't want to be seen. Get back." So they ended the session with Ingo as if he had to sort of get out of there. We wouldn't do that now. What we would do now is simply continue the session, and they'd go up to the extraterrestrials and keep on looking at them and finding out everything there. But, it's been reported numerous times that some extraterrestrial species can see you coming. And in the Phoenix Lights, it was one of those. It was those situations where they saw the person actually coming. So when Dick Algar went up close to this large extraterrestrial and started to describe him, look in his eyes, the extraterrestrial just, saw him and the whole thing, looking in his eyes and everything, and off went the conversation. so it's just like if someone came up to you and started staring at your eyes, you'd probably say, "Well, what's up?" Well, that's sort of what happened. It's not the only incident. However, it's the biggest incident. The Phoenix Lights events of 1997 is the main one. But there have been other incidences where the lights reappeared and similar type of things happened. But this was a big one in 1997 because it was witnessed by so many people over such a large area. And again, a big key factor here is that the former governor of the state, went on record describing what the whole thing was about. So that was sort of a special accent for the 1997 experience. But these lights have been not too infrequent. The only way that it sort of makes sense is if you understand that it's not that we have a soul, but that we are a soul and we have a body. So that the body is sort of a secondary thing, and that the soul, or what we call the subspace aspect of the larger self, projects itself through this physical body and gets it to work, and there's limitations and the perceptions and other things that it can do. But that's not Jungian or Freudian psychology. So Freud and Jung both have sort of their own spin on how they saw the world, and neither one of them can be integrated well with what we now know from the remote viewing phenomenon. For example, in the remote viewing phenomenon, it clearly indicates that we are greater than our physical body, and so that dreams may be things that we need to interpret, but they very likely are things that actually happen, not just stories that actually occur. So the interpretation of dreams is sort of a weird thing, because it's in a sense there's some ways to interpret dreams is to say that it's impossible to think of something that doesn't exist in some way or another. So, the idea that in sort of a modern understanding of physics is that nothing actually materializes out of the quantum realm and thus out of the macro realm unless it's recognized or conceptualized or thought of in some way. And in a very real sense, that means that when we dream something, at some level, that something actually happens. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have to be interpreted, but it does mean that the dreams happen in some way, and none of that corresponds with anything out of Freud and Jung. But yeah, I'm aware of the interpretations of that. And that Flying Saucer book of Jung's is a classic example of him taking a set of ideas of people taking a set of ideas that they have and that they've accepted, and then projecting those ideas out into sort of everything else that they see out there to make that stuff fit within that set of ideas. One of the things that's interesting about the dream experience is that there's no time delay. So when an event starts to get close to our current now, you're likely to pick up evidence of that in a dream before you actually experience it in real physical life. Because with dreams, it's like remote viewing. There's no time delay. So as things get closer to us, like think of an event as like a ship you're on the coast and there's a ship getting closer to you on the coast until it eventually pulls into the harbor. So the dream is like seeing the ship in the far distance before it actually docks at the harbor. And when it docks at the harbor, that's when the physical event actually happens. So physical events that are happening are like that boat that's distant. They're coming to you. They're getting close to you. And so with dreams, you actually get an idea of things that are headed your way. And so I record my own dreams because if something's heading my way that I don't particularly want to happen, well, that's like using a telescope to sort of see what's out there heading my way, and then I have the ability to change things so that that doesn't happen. But yeah, I find dreams to be very useful with regard to non-local or non-linear consciousness. And so I study them and I look at them and I find them to be really fascinating. But I do not dismiss them as delusional or simply psychological or neuro sort of computational fantasies. Well, what I think actually happens is that the life that we live before we're physical beings actually is a sort of like a sensory overload compared to what we can experience in physical bodies. There's so much more into it. And so when we have a dream experience, we can only remember a certain amount. And that amount fades away because the computational processes of the brain sort of take over and sort of reoccupy the memory of the core's mainframe, you might call it, our brain. And so it sort of pushes that information out. And so it's only when the conscious mind is basically shut down that the dreams can get enough material in to the physical brain that it can be, that you can actually remember a little bit of it. And then you only have a short window of time to write that stuff down before the other thinking processes basically push it out. Think of the brain as like a computer, and you can load a program in, but if you load another program in that takes a lot of space, it's going to have to close down the first program and push it out in order to run properly. That's what the conscious mind is like. So there's a brief window of time after you wake that you have a chance to write down what the dream is. And after that, it will fade, and it will fade quickly.